Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there, I hope that you're doing well and you are ready for today's program. So today on the show, we have, well, the one, the only, if you haven't heard about them before, DrFirst. Hey, if this is your first time, this is a great place to hear about that. We'll be talking to the president of the company in just a moment to hear all about how they're using technology. Hey, that's what we like, to improve healthcare, and especially in these times, the way things used to work just aren't working anymore. So here we have a company that is dedicated to bringing healthcare into the 21st century. So everyone, before we get started, first things first, computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything, including show notes for shows such as today. If you'd like to check out the guest website, DrFirst.com, or head on over to computeramerica.com and we'll have a link directly to it. Also, while you're there, be sure to check out past shows, future shows, podcasts, articles, reviews, all that and more, and of course, find us on social media. So I want to get all that out of the way quickly so that we can bring on our guests and have a pleasant conversation here. So as I said before, DrFirst, they are not a healthcare provider. I'm sorry. They provide back-end support for healthcare providers. They produce something called the Healthiverse. If you haven't heard of that, we're going to talk about that as well. And they've been around since 2000. They have more than 300,000 healthcare providers working with them, and just so many people have jumped on board with this. And I'm always looking for kind of standout companies that are trying to really innovate in a field as complex and, in a lot of ways stagnant as healthcare. Things are very, very slow to change. So let's go ahead and welcome on our guest. We have none other than Cam Deemer. He is the president of DrFirst, and I'm really happy to have you on, Cam. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's a pleasure to talk with you today.
Yeah, our pleasure. And you sound great. So let's go ahead and I gave just the latest introduction. If you wouldn't mind, give us a background on DrFirst, where did the idea come from, and then a little bit of your background as well. Have you always been in technology, healthcare? What's your background?
Yeah, so give you a little on the company first. The company was founded in actually January 1, 2000 by Jim Chen. Jim wanted to be the first company of the new millennium and did everything he could to make sure that that he was out there first. Originally, the company was founded with the idea that it would provide tools for physicians. Back in 2000, the idea of prescribing electronically was pretty new. Mm-hmm. And the company, said, hey, that's what we're going to do. Just a few years later, we made some major decisions to change our direction to be more of a technology platform company, a little more broadly than just the e-prescribing piece, but we can talk about that in a little bit. So over time, DrFirst has, like you said today, we've got about 300,000 folks working in healthcare that use our services in one way or another. And I think it'd be interesting to talk through that a little bit today.
Yeah,
my background's actually a little different. I did not start in healthcare or healthcare tech. I actually started in the ministry. Worked for about 8 years, as a youth minister, senior minister. Did 4 years working on linguistics and Bible translation in Papua New Guinea. And then when I came home in the recession in '92, unable to find work, I just sort of stumbled into healthcare tech and ended up making that my career, going forward. So primarily working in the prescription benefit management industry, and then migrating into more of electronic prescribing and electronic health record systems over time.
We have a lot of very interesting people come on the show and share with us their background. Yours is a first. That is very a youth minister. That's something very different. But hey, new perspectives definitely appreciated. It's nice that not everyone comes from the same university out in California, and does this
That's
kind of
right.
thing. So I'm happy that you're working with DrFirst and you're here to talk about the company. And I think that my initial question is because you mentioned that this company was started with the idea of using new technology to not just help healthcare providers, but to help the quality of care and the patients, who are kind of the benefactors of this whole system. Let's talk about, we mentioned 300,000 healthcare professionals and tons of prescribers, I think like over 100,000. What is the difference between you and I guess what healthcare providers have been using before this point? What new technology, what new service, what are you really improving upon when you onboard new healthcare professionals or prescribers or anything like this? Where's your kind of
Sure.
benefit?
So let me, if you don't mind, let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
And just lay a little more groundwork, and then I can talk about how we do these things differently.
Sure.
It's a little bit hard to talk about our industry. It's a jargony industry, So you can stop me if you feel like I'm using words that aren't going to make sense. But our footprint as a company is quite broad. Mostly we focus on what we call the triangle of care. So if you picture a triangle and you think, hey, there's a doctor at the top, because everything starts with the doctor. If they don't prescribe a drug, nobody goes to the pharmacy.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't admit you to a hospital, nobody goes to the hospital. So the doctor's at the apex. You've got the pharmacy at one corner. You have hospital, other acute care organizations at the other corner. And that doctor-pharmacy-hospital relationship is kind of at the heart of healthcare, with the patient in the middle of the triangle. So a lot of our work's there, and we focus primarily on what's called the medication management workflow. So medication management just means how people, how physicians select the drug to treat your condition, how that drug is prescribed, what all goes into that process, how you obtain the drug, how you pick it up, how's it dispensed,
Mm-hmm.
and then do you use it or not, and is it having the impact it's supposed to have? It's like a 4-step process, and a lot of what we do has focused on the things that happen in those 4 steps. But that's a pretty broad section of the healthcare industry. So we primarily build tech platforms and standalone applications that help doctors as they're prescribing, pharmacies as they're dispensing, and patients as they acquire their medications. This area is highly regulated, and in order to maintain like a legally compliant system that's high performance and scalable, because this happens on virtually every patient visit, we take the burden of creating that kind of a compliant, scalable, secure system on ourselves, so that our customers, who are typically other vendors, who are medical record vendors or hospital system vendors, they can embed our platform and they don't have to worry about that medication management process any longer. We take that over for them. So over half of physician and hospital vendors in the country have actually integrated our e-prescribing platform into their clinical systems. That's the platform we call our Copio.
Mm-hmm.
Because this process is kind of a team sport, patients are often seeing a mix of physicians and specialists. They may have a care team when they're in the hospital. They're picking up at the pharmacy. So collaboration all around that triangle is very important. The doctor needs to know what the pharmacy's doing. The pharmacy needs to know what the hospital did with the patient. Everybody needs to know what everybody else is doing.
Right.
So another one of our key offerings is a secure collaboration platform called Backline that makes it simpler to break down the divisions between these silos of care so that everybody can collaborate on this patient that they're treating in common. That way they can make clinical decisions with full information, not just the records that are in that practice. So that's another area of focus for us. And the last one's kind of interesting. In the last 3 years, we've really started to focus on the patient as well. And one of the really neat things we do is reach out to patients with a text when they've been prescribed a drug, which might not seem unusual. If you ever, if you pick up drugs at a pharmacy, you probably get a ton of text messages from the pharmacy reminding you to pick it up and it's time for your refill. But the difference in what we do is we provide the patient with many of the same tools we provided to the doctor who wrote the prescription in the first place, like how much the drug will cost, financial assistance if you can't afford the drug, why the drug's important, how to take the drug, short videos, short education materials, alert them to the opportunity to participate in clinical trials if there's something relevant for them, give them dose reminders, let them schedule pickup times or delivery of the drugs, basically trying to answer all the questions in the patient's mind about whether they should pick up the drug or not, because a lot of patients decide not to pick it up, and that doesn't usually help people get better.
Right.
And we try to remove the barriers to picking it up as well. So those are the main areas that we work on from a technology perspective. What makes us different, which was your question, is really two things. One, we decided a long time ago, over 10 years ago as a company, that instead of trying to build something vertical, like a high quality health record system or something, that instead we would create a thin layer through healthcare. We would focus on network effect. I'm sure you've talked about that before. That each person who becomes an endpoint on our network should benefit from all the other people on the network as well. And to do that, we focused on a key workflow, which was medication management, which almost always occurs. And we've worked for many years to create enough endpoints on that network so that we can create value for everyone working with patients. That's a big part of why one of our recent products is around collaboration. So that thin layer approach is different than what most companies are doing in healthcare. The second thing is that we view, you actually mentioned this earlier, we view the triangle of care as part of a much larger healthcare ecosystem that we call the Healthiverse. It basically refers to all the stakeholders in the healthcare universe. So, you've got the doctor, hospital, pharmacy, and patient, but then you got all these other people who have something they want to say when there's a patient encounter happening with a provider. You've got the health plan who's paying for the services. You've got labs, durable medical equipment vendors, prescription benefit management companies. There's tons of different stakeholders, and we work to give them all a voice at the point of encounter. Physicians, hospital care group teams, they're willing to carry a message from one of those stakeholders to the patient, but only when the patient's there. They don't want to have to hunt the patient down later to do something that they could have done while they were actually having an encounter with the patient.
Right.
So we use the hooks we've embedded in medication management to deliver information from these stakeholders that the doctor needs, that the pharmacy needs, that the patient needs in order to make good decisions about therapy.
Yeah.
So those are the two differences.
Yeah, and I gotta say, as someone who my parents, they've had a lot of health issues lately, and I've been dealing with a lot of what you just described. And especially, like, let's say picking up medication, just for instance, the pharmacy, I'm sorry, the pharmacist there will, kind of meet with you for, in my case, like about 30 seconds and say, is this the first time taking this drug? Here are some things you need to watch out for, taking this. And then they kind of wave you off and say, off you go. And I've noticed that, there's a lot of questions that don't come to mind in 30 seconds. And so your approach to, kind of give people that information readily and, not be like, do you have any questions? Because I feel like when you do that, you may miss, like you said, what is this for? And, 100 other questions that, you just don't think of in the moment. And I guess having that, like you were describing, that constant flow of information, you don't have to hopefully hit all the points in your only encounter for, let's say, the month.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually had a family member recently who had a pretty serious diagnosis, and he was trying to explain it to me, and everything I asked, he was very fuzzy on, because all he heard was, you're going to probably have a really bad outcome, and he missed everything else. Like what even the actual condition was.
Very
he couldn't
stressful.
even explain that very well. Yeah. So that's one side of it, is how the patient experiences that. The other side is how isolated providers can be in the information they have. This touched me in a very personal way a few years ago now. But I was in the hospital for a procedure, and they were doing that thing where they put those squeezy pants on your legs, when you're going to go through an operation. And while they're putting those on, a nurse wheels up a computer on a little stand, and she starts asking me a series of questions. What's your name? What are you here for? Things like that. And then she says, all right, so which kidney are we removing today? And I was staring at her, and I said, no kidneys? And she said, well, no, is it the right or the left? And I said, well, it's not either kidney. I'm not here for having my kidneys removed. She said, oh, well, that's what it says here. Well, that's interesting. Well, don't worry about it. Your doctor, I'm sure, knows what he's doing. I said, well, I don't know that. Should we write on my back, no kidneys or something?
Leave kidneys.
She's like, no, don't worry. And then she looked at a few other things, and she said, all right, so I see you're taking 2 narcotic drugs. Are you still taking those? I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not taking any narcotic drugs.
Wrong records,
yeah. Oh, well, this must be wrong then. So it's very common for the provider to have incomplete information. Completely wrong is a pretty big step. But so it's on both sides, provider and patient.
So, and even to that point, because that's something that, we've heard a lot of instances about. And I think since some of the stories that have hit the news, much to your story, I remember another one where someone was going in for kind of like a leg surgery, kind of deal. And they were drawing X's all over, the opposite leg. And they're like, why are you doing that? It's like, oh, it's so the surgeon knows not to touch this leg.
Yeah.
For let's say a kneecap replacement, things like that.
Right.
So, very, very impersonal. And I get that, not every surgeon, let's say a surgeon has, 5, 6, 7, 8, we're asking more and more of our healthcare providers, all the time. And, it's kind of a blur of patient records and, just kind of, here's the surgery, here's the x-rays, here's the information, don't get too personal, just do your job. That sense of depersonalized healthcare management where, I've heard stories. Unfortunately, I'm not old enough to remember the good old days of, kind of having the family physician that knew you, your grandparents, your parents, and, you built that relationship. Have you seen in your field kind of this idea that, healthcare, a very, very personal topic, is getting less personalized, and how is DrFirst trying to address that?
Yeah, that's very apropos to the way we view the space as well. A specific example of this, recently we introduced a telemedicine solution, a telehealth solution. It was on our roadmap to add that to our collaboration platform, and fortuitously we launched it just as the pandemic hit. So we were not caught flat-footed on that, but we had a telehealth solution ready. The difference in the way we think about it, though, is we're not a telehealth company. We're a collaboration company with roots in med management. So we could see very clearly that there were downsides to telehealth that we wanted to avoid, but we also wanted to extend the benefits of telehealth beyond where a pure telehealth company can. So, we started with a full care collaboration platform that really lets people, if you will, digitally transform workflows. Anytime you'd be on the phone or sending a fax or whatever, you can completely replace that. But we started with that. We started with perfecting that kind of a platform so it could be installed quickly, any size site, any number of users, just a matter of hours instead of weeks. But what we were really focused on was not allowing telehealth to replace the one-on-one relationship between the provider and the patient, but instead making it possible for the physician to extend his practice out into the community. Because during the pandemic, they wanted to keep patients from coming into the practice where they might expose other patients, if they actually had COVID.
Right.
So telehealth does that very well. That's like the benefit of telehealth. But we didn't want to focus on it's like what you just said, with telehealth, you can see a doctor, but can you see your doctor?
Right.
So will telehealth drive a wedge in that relationship that you would have with your primary care doc or your specialist and just send you to the next available specialist or the next available, general practice doctor? And we think that's a real problem. So telehealth, while it saves money for payers, improves access for patients, creates safety during the pandemic, it very much contributes to that erosion of the traditional provider-patient relationship. And often that's the only thing you have going for you. That example you gave about, the pharmacy taking care of you and then sending you on your way, and you have a million questions later you think of. Think about what it's like when you have to start over every time with a new doctor who doesn't really have your records, doesn't have any personal involvement with you, doesn't know any of your, long-term history. It's a real issue. So we've designed our platform to primarily focus on allowing physicians to maintain their same relationship with patients, not doing it the other way around where you're just making sure a patient has access to any physician that's available. So anyway, that's the side of telehealth we settled on.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you do. And some of those numbers that you were throwing out, because like I said, I've been spending a lot of time in doctors' offices, and especially smaller, smaller physicians and doctors and things like that. They say that one of the most time-consuming parts of their job has to be communicating with larger entities and trying to get messaging and records sent and things like that. Like the interconnectedness, like what you're offering and what we're talking about here, is something that I think the healthcare industry right now has been suffering from for a long time, because it seems like every other hospital has a different system that they integrate, and they switch systems every 12 months because none of them do everything that they want. And then, of course, no two systems talk to each other, and there's a lot of fragmentation. I guess that would be you mentioned earlier, or at least I saw on your website, about these different silos of information that you're trying to connect. Is this a problem that can be solved? I guess is the most blunt way to put it.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts on that. I mean, you're obviously right that it's a problem that hasn't been fully resolved. There's been an awful lot of movement toward resolving it over the last 20 years. So at the heart of the issue is initially the heart of the issue was standardization.
Mm-hmm.
That systems needed to speak the same language in order to be able to intercommunicate well. So we saw the federal government step in and start to apply regulations, initially more around the prescribing process, which again was where we primarily worked. But then starting to extend that out into standardization of medical language and processes as well. The latest development that I think is probably pretty positive is over the next couple years, there's going to be tightening regulations around data sharing and trying to eliminate the data blocking that happens usually for commercial reasons.
Mm-hmm.
To protect my patient population, I don't want to share their information with you because I would make it too easy for you to access my patient population.
Definitely not a patient first kind of mentality. Oh, and sorry to step on you, but definitely not a patient first kind of mentality.
No, business first. It's the business first mentality. So there are new federal regulations actually governing this that will take effect over the next couple years, and that theoretically will open up the free flow of information quite a bit and actually give patients more control, because part of the requirements are if a patient's using an application, that application cannot be unreasonably blocked from accessing the patient's data. So I'm hopeful about that. The downside of federal involvement and the requiring of specific standards is it really steps on innovation. If everyone has to do everything the same way, there's no opportunity to do something better, and neither is there usually capital available to develop that something better because everybody's spending their money on building to whatever they were just, told by the regulations they have to do.
Yeah.
So we've seen a lot of focus on building standard things, but it's starting to squelch, some of the new ways technology could be used. So it's kind of a balancing act. I applaud the feds for giving it a shot, to try to balance that, but it's something we need to continually keep an eye on.
Yeah, when you really talk about, obviously innovation is good, but at the same time, you don't want to, really kind of outpace your healthcare provider. But at some point, you're sitting there in 2018, even 2020, and you're waiting for one office to fax another office, and it's like that is a speed bump in the speed of care and the urgency of this whole thing. So with all that being said, I had two different questions I wanted to ask. The first one completely blew out of my mind. The second one, though, had to do with, kind of the future of healthcare and, transition to this just a little bit, because we've been talking about these the benefits of telehealth. Obviously, the pandemic is still going and will probably continue for another year. And, when this whole thing kind of comes to an end, when we can shake each other's hand without, inadvertently killing someone, we, I'm hoping that we take the good and, and keep the good with us, which I think there's been a lot of efficiencies that have happened. I think that, people have been able to see their doctor who, before it would have been a whole day to, let's say someone has a hard time getting in a van, they have oxygen or they have, all these other conditions. Having doctors and healthcare providers more readily accessible through telemedicine has been a good thing. I think that there should be, more beyond telemedicine, but it's good. At DrFirst, and really just, in your personal opinion as well, how do you see healthcare changing after all this shakes out?
Well, I think you're right that telehealth is here to stay. There's been a lot written lately about how the pandemic has accelerated trends in healthcare, and clearly the move to telehealth is one of those trends. In my opinion.
And Cam, sorry to kind of step on you, but to that point, we actually did an article about 2 weeks ago saying that analysts were predicting that the work from home movement, people being able to telecommute into their jobs, they took about what they projected about 10 years later it would have looked like, and they squeezed that into like 6 months. It's been more rapid than I think anyone, we were kind of set up for it, but the adoption has been so rapid in so many different fields.
That's been very true of our company. We went from a kind of a very negative on remote work, people working from home, to all of a sudden 100% of our people were working from home. And after the first couple weeks of adjustment, we realized, hey, this isn't as bad as we thought it would be. And we actually found greater productivity, more focus, and it hugely accelerated change at our company, in the way we approach that. So what I was going to say, Ben, is, in my opinion, I think telehealth is actually a big experiment right now. Clearly, it's been vital to responding to the pandemic. It would have been terrible if technology wasn't already ready for that, and people still had to come to the practice and be exposed, especially since the ones most commonly in the practice are the ones most at risk, right? The risk of big complications. What we probably haven't quite reckoned with yet is that telehealth is most appropriate for a segment of the population, but not quite as helpful for other segments. So I would expect they will eventually settle on a mixed model where people receiving chronic care, where they require more detailed focus to manage their conditions, you're probably not going to be able to adequately handle that on telehealth. I was thinking about how my dad would, probably do this if he was having chest pains and he dialed up a telehealth provider and they say, "What's wrong?" And he'd say, "Well, I think I have heartburn." And then they would deal with heartburn, right? But if he was in the practice, they could put him on an ECG or something and, and just look at him and see that his color wasn't good and say, "I don't think you have heartburn. I think you got something else going on. Let's do some tests." So telehealth has its place, but I suspect that we'll eventually settle out to kind of a mixed model, and that's probably positive that we do. One of the things that got shoved to the side during the pandemic was the importance of protecting private health information. You're probably aware that there was an exception that the government granted for doctors to use systems that are not HIPAA compliant, and that kind of blew my mind. I didn't think we would ever do that, but suddenly you had systems in use that clearly could expose patient data, didn't have the right legal relationships or technology, infrastructure suddenly being used for this private information. I guess you do what you have to do in a pandemic, but coming out of the pandemic, I would expect that clamps are going to be back on and patient information will be protected again.
Yeah, I got to say that I was actually not aware of the exceptions granted to healthcare providers, but we have over the years really gotten a good idea of what HIPAA compliance looks like and just how how secure a lot of most make their make their patients' records secure, safe, messaging and that kind of thing. Sending that information, and to hear that it's hey, you could just send a patient's records over, let's say, a Zoom call, for instance. That would be like you said, a sign of the times, but not sustainable in the long run.
No, it's not. And I expect, like I said, that will all be clamped down again after the pandemic passes, which you might be right. It might be another year.
Yeah.
Beyond that, we talked earlier about the new regulations related to data blocking. So I think it'll be a really interesting time over the next couple of years as we see more and more use of the existing technologies, like we said, things that have been accelerated, and then couple that with a freer flow of information between systems and between business entities, like your hospital and my hospital might have to exchange records where before they would have refused to do so. That will probably make telehealth better. So we'll probably end up with a lot of telehealth, improved telehealth, maybe other experimental designs like healthcare kiosks and things like that. But I think we're all getting used to the idea that we don't necessarily have to be in a practice to receive some level of care.
So, and these percentages are in no way reflective of the actual situation. But let's say, telemedicine to, regular medicine was, let's say, 10/90 before the pandemic. And of course, since the pandemic, we've swung that to, 80/20 telemedicine, regular medicine, and you're thinking that we're going to swing back somewhere, and even if we come out 30/70, that's still a huge increase to the availability and the usefulness of telemedicine.
Yeah, I actually 30/70 is probably reasonable. I'm just thinking in terms of the patients with chronic conditions and whether even they need to be in the office every time, or if once they learn to use the technology, whether for like a how's your blood pressure doing kind of checkup, whether they could just take that remotely as well. I think we'll get addicted to the convenience.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if it settled out at a little more even percentage than that.
It's one of those things that we look at a lot of other fields that kind of come here on the show, and let's say if it's a office place, kind of a workflow solution or something like that, we always say what's changed, and sometimes it's just the marketing. They think that they can do it better. They have it a little bit more organized, and they're going to market the heck out of it, and they're hoping to come out as one of the big players. The other side of it is we have a new technology, and the technology is going to help propel our idea. And that's the ones that I think you need to set up and take notice of, is when the technology is available, when it's ready to go, and it's something fundamentally different than what we were doing before. And I think the availability of technology is, I think, the key difference in what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think it's very exciting to see how quickly change is happening, and for the most part, quite positive, I think.
So let's talk about let's say someone wanted to use this for their patients. They're a healthcare provider, and they wanted to onboard. You mentioned it would take a matter of hours or days to set up the system on their site, and of course people would then have to download it on their phone. I'm assuming this whole process. How complex is it for, let's say, a healthcare provider that hasn't really dabbled in kind of personalized apps and things like that? Have you been receiving a lot of feedback from providers that this is easy to use and working?
Yeah, actually, the one thing you mentioned there about having the patient having to download an app, that is true for many of the telehealth systems. That is not true for ours.
Oh.
With our system, the doctor reaches out, with a message to the patient's phone, and when they click on the message, opens up a portal for them that it looks like an app and it works like an app, but it didn't require them to download anything. So the patient
And this is Backline that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, this is Backline. That's correct.
Gotcha.
So yeah, from a doctor perspective, I think initially we saw some confusion. If you think about it from a doctor perspective, it's not just the technology, obviously, it's also how does my practice workflow, function under this new method of working with patients. So how do we handle scheduling appointments? What kind of things are we willing to do online? How do we keep people from coming in that we don't want to come in, but they might be resistant to doing a remote visit? The technology itself seems to be pretty well accepted by doctors. I mean, doctors are generally extremely intelligent, and they don't have that much problem mastering it once they decide they're willing to. So we've actually had pretty good feedback on usability. Again, a lot of what we do is individual practice, also very large health systems, and that's where it's useful to be able to implement them very quickly so they don't have to wait to get the process going. And then they just have to do their own adjustments to their practice workflow to make it viable for how they want to work with patients. Yeah, well accepted, and they don't seem to have that much trouble adapting to it.
Makes a lot of sense. And of course, for the users out there, the fact that it's just links and a text message, I mean, it's about as simple as it can get. So you definitely like to hear that. Speaking of technology and speaking of kind of how this whole thing operates, it's a bit of a buzzword, but artificial intelligence does have an actual place in the technology landscape that we find ourselves in, and it's really just kind of learning algorithms that will over time be able to recognize patterns. And healthcare has been latching on to this idea that luckily most AI companies that come on the show and talk to us, they all agree. They're not here to replace doctors. They're not here to replace healthcare. They're here to augment and make it better and more efficient. How does DrFirst use artificial intelligence in its products?
It's a really great question, and I'm actually pretty excited about the way we use it. What you said about replacing the doctor, there's a great deal of artificial intelligence in healthcare that's aimed at helping with diagnosis or prescription of care after diagnosis occurs, things like that. We've actually focused machine learning and AI more into how we can improve workflows for medical providers. So recently, we actually obtained a patent on one of our products. It's called SmartSig. Bear with me a little bit as I explain this, but there is there's a key product in the industry that's available to everyone. It's just a feed of medication history. So every time that you pick up a drug at a pharmacy, every time your health plan pays for part of your drug, that's recorded, and that can all be put together and then made available to like a medical records company. So typically it's used in the hospital. You've been, like in my example, I gave a pretty bad example actually, but in a good example, you'd be admitted to the hospital. They would have somebody debriefing you on what they call your home meds, the meds you're taking at home before you came into the hospital. And rather than have to trust you or try to get you to remember everything you're taking, which people are pretty bad at, they can just do a query in their system and pull back a set of your records, your medical history, or your medication history, sorry. Right. But there's a dirty little secret behind that, which is that information is compiled from sources that use different compendiums. So they don't all name drugs exactly the same way. They don't all use codes exactly the same way. And some of the sources don't record all the information related to the prescription. So when you get it back, it might tell you the name of the drug and the quantity of the tablets, but it wouldn't tell how many you were supposed to take or what strength they were. There'd be information missing. Also, typically, it doesn't return information divided into neat fields that the system can consume. Because you'd like to have quantity in one field, drug name in another field, strength in another field. And it doesn't come back that way. It comes back as a text string. So the only way it can generally be imported is as a blob of text that you can't really do anything with, once it's in your system. It's very frustrating to hospitals who receive information that way. So in order to address that issue of missing data that's not in individual fields, different vocabularies that are used, we built this system called SmartSig. We used machine learning to analyze billions of records and designed it to be able to infer the missing information very accurately. So we can now fill in missing information or improve information on about 96% of the records that we receive through through the industry standard MedHistory feed. That means for a hospital, they don't need to make a call to the pharmacy to ask, well, what are the instructions for that med? They don't need to import text blobs that they can't use for clinical alerts or any other kind of automated processing in the hospital. And it lets the hospital control the vocabulary. They can tell our system, look, we want to use tab, not tablets. We want to say, take twice daily instead of using the Latin abbreviation. And we automatically do all those translations for them. So they basically end up with, instead of a dirty feed that just causes continual frustration, a very clean feed, and it cuts out a lot of the other manual work they'd have to do around that. So we found that those kinds of uses of AI are very helpful.
It's very funny because that's let's take something as I think a lot of people are very familiar with what a smart assistant is. Think of Google and Amazon's offerings, things like that. When they were first, kind of becoming popular, I remember talking about them and saying that the importance of artificial intelligence in this way is that instead of a person having to learn to talk to a computer or a machine, the computer or the machine learns to talk to the person. And of course, that's in the consumer field, but it sounds like the same struggle that you're trying to solve, where, it's not about everyone learning to talk to the database. It's about the database and the information learning to talk to people.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to say it. We've also used artificial intelligence for things like reading health plan cards. There's not really a standard way of producing a healthcare card, and being able to accurately interpret that saves 30 seconds of data entry, which adds up over the course of a day for people. We use it to interpret driver's licenses for EMS vendors, things like that. So yeah, using it to make life easier for the provider community has been our key focus.
And really, that's stuff that, regardless of how healthcare kind of swings after this, after the pandemic, or, kind of how the regulations kind of change going forward, I think you're absolutely right. This technology has clear-cut benefits that, regardless of where, the politicians go or anything else, that's going to save time and it's going to save money, and it's just efficiency.
I completely agree.
So with, and of course, I found it here. If anyone out there has been watching the video portion, or we're of course primarily radio, but if you've been following along, we found SmartSig here, and there's a number of other, MedHX, pharmacy data sharing, policies that you have here, consulting, and of course, the people can go on your website and see, all the different solutions that you have. I mean, you have a very diverse offering of products. I guess, without getting to every single one, because we could be here for hours, I think, let's talk about where you're looking to, kind of go next. What, are you looking to update your existing products? Are you looking to bring something else out? What's in the future for DrFirst?
So we're focused today, or moving forward, we're really focused on three key problems we feel haven't been addressed yet effectively by the industry. And the first one's interesting. It's a little counterintuitive. We work with a number of the major pharmacy chains. We're sitting with one of the chains recently, and they said that the thing that frustrates them more than anything is they still receive 40% of their prescriptions in some way other than electronically. And it blows their mind, because they've built their whole system to receive prescriptions electronically now. They don't want them on paper. They don't want them phoned in, but they still get them on paper, and they still get them phoned in, and they don't understand why, because all of the industry press releases indicate that the vast majority of doctors now electronically prescribe. But again, what people don't realize is, well, not all the time. Yeah, sure, I have a system, I have a medical record system, I can e-prescribe, but I don't do it at night when I'm catching up on my patient records at home, the things I need to do, or if after hours on call and somebody needs a script, I'm not going to take the time to VPN into the office and authenticate into my system. It's a lot easier just to call the pharmacy, so there's huge leakage around electronic prescriptions. We've developed an application called iPrescribe that it's on the App Store, Android and Apple, and you'll see it's got rave reviews. We're aiming to replace the script pad and replace the phone and be always available to the doctor at those times they need to send a script in, but they're tempted to not do it electronically. We want to give them a really simple, fast, powerful way to do it electronically without all the hassles they would have today. So that's a big focus for us, to get rid of all those non-electronic scripts. Second thing, I talked about how we reach out to the patient with price transparency around drugs, which is the number one request of patients, that would somebody please tell them how much things are going to cost. The second thing that patients always say they want on surveys is, could I please have all my medical records in one place? I don't want to have to go to 3 different portals or 5 different portals, to try to understand what's happening. We've created an application called Huddle. If you are looking for it on the App Store, it's called Huddle Health. Huddle addresses that need to get all records in one place and is especially focused on caregivers who have a continual need, to focus on healthcare, whereas you or me, we may not have a day-to-day reason why we need to keep focused on our health. But for people who are caring for elderly parents, special needs children, mothers with new babies, that need to keep track of all the new baby stuff, we've aimed Huddle at people like that who want to be able to accumulate the records for whoever they're providing care for and have easy access to those, easy ability to share them with other physicians, family members, things like that. So anyway, resolving that issue of please help me keep track of all my healthcare records, we're going after that problem. And the third thing is, we're, for the first time, stepping outside of our little box we built for ourselves around medication management.
Right.
And we're starting to apply some of that same thinking to the medical side of the industry. So where drugs may make up 10 to 20% of the spend, medical procedures and office visits, things like that, make up the other 80% or so. We're going to bring price transparency into that space as well, so patients understand what their choices are in terms of providers and what their procedures will cost in different venues, as well as, quality information and where there are gaps in care that need to be filled. So we've started working on that with some of our payer customers, and we'll have a lot of focus on that over the next few years.
That is certainly, let's say non-life-threatening procedures, and being able to, I guess, kind of shop around is something that I think will save a lot of people money. And hey, some facilities just aren't set up for it, and others are set up perfectly for it. Makes all the sense in the world. And by the way, we also found the Huddle Health app there, huddle-health.com, if people like to check that out. And I really like that one because we cover data breaches all the time here on the show, and it's always so. It's always really bad to lose, kind of your patient's health care information, because unlike a bank account number, unlike a credit card number or something like that, all that can be changed. A person's health cannot be, like, their health history cannot be changed. So making sure that information stays safe, secure, and if you don't want someone to have that information, starting today, then you can revoke that access. You can, be much safer and cleaner with the information. So you have a lot on your plate.
We do. But again, we're trying to take that thin layer approach and give stakeholders a voice. Back to the Healthiverse, we think everyone needs to converge on the patient, and we're trying to gradually work through the unresolved workflows in the industry to make that possible.
For sure, for sure. And so, everyone, we have been talking to Mr. Cam Deemer. He is the president of DrFirst, DrFirst.com. And Cam, before we say goodbye, and I apologize, I know that we said this interview was going to be about 30 minutes. An hour flew on by, and I want to thank you so much for sticking around and talking to us. I'll let you have the last word, though. Is there anything else you'd like to tell our audience?
I'll just say that we're very excited that one of the side effects of the pandemic has been a general challenge to everything we believe about how care is provided and delivered. The pandemic drove us all out of our offices, kept us all locked up in our homes, kept us from traveling. But nonetheless, this has been a time of really dynamic innovation, which is really cool. There's like a new openness to practical ideas. There's finally usage of technology that's been available for a long time. And people are really jumping in to solve some of these structural and remaining technical issues that have dogged healthcare for a really long time. So I hope we can all come out of this, come out the other side of the pandemic in a better place and not just a different place. I think we all know it's going to be different. I think we as a company are pretty optimistic that it's actually going to be better, and we're excited to see how it plays out over the next year or so.
Absolutely. I think they're absolutely right. And I'm very happy that you're able to come on the show and tell us about this because this is a very complex industry. There's a lot of players, and I think you broke it down, very, very well. So everyone, once again, if you like, check that out, computeramerica.com. We'll have a link to the website. That's all you have to remember. And Cam, thank you so much. And hey, maybe in 6, 7, 8 months, we can have you back on and see where things are.
Thank you very much, Ben. It was great to talk to you.
Our pleasure, and hey, we'll certainly catch you next time. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. So there he goes. And again, if you want to find out more, DrFirst, definitely check that out. So everyone, we're going to go ahead and continue on with computer and technology news. We have time for one story. I have the perfect story. It's going to be a fun cap off to the end of the day. And hey, why don't we go ahead and get that going? So everyone, computer and technology news brought to you by Computer America. So all the healthcare talk, let's switch gears just for a moment, just to relax you. And I think that the only story that we're going to do today is a personal one. And I know that a lot of people out there, no offense, if you watch a radio show about computers and technology, you're probably a nerd. And if you're a nerd, then you have, you probably read some books, and you've probably heard about the individual, George R.R. Martin. And he, of course, is the writer of the series, and I think he also directed the HBO show Game of Thrones. The book has been he's been writing the book since the 90s, I believe. It's been forever since he released the first one, as people in this comment section on this article from Ars Technica have been pointing out. But yeah, he said that the pandemic had a side effect, and that side effect was a forced isolation that helped him actually get some work done on his novels. So I know that a lot of people, wow, we are just flat. Wait, oh no! I see what happened. So yeah, we're almost out of time. Let's go ahead and stop the music here just for a bit because I want to be able to really talk about this just for a moment. But The Winds of Winter, the long-awaited sequel to The Winds of Winter follows A Dance with Dragons, I believe. He's been working on that thing since like 2011, and hey, 9 years later, he's finally getting around to having a closer release date. So we can certainly hope that is, that's going to happen. He said that hopefully by 2021, that is his new deadline. 2021, sometime in 2021, he will have the next book in the series. Although I think a lot of people out there, they've heard this before. And for those who don't know, in 2015, he said he was hard working on it. He was going to really finish this thing. That was in 2015. Here we are in 2020, still waiting, and he says now 2021. I share a lot of people's skepticism. I hope that he does. I love the series. I think that he's built a fantastic world, and I would love to hear more of it, but 2021 might be a bit too far. We'll see. Everyone, that's all we have time here for today. Once again, thank you, DrFirst, and thank you everyone out there who tunes into the show. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And hey, we'll catch you next time. Bye, everyone.